The Unremembered. The hologram sputtered, a ghost of blue light in the dim confines of Varric Thorne's bedroom. It was an old recruitment transmission, one he'd salvaged from a junked Imperial data slate. A stormtrooper, his armor impossibly white and pristine, stood at attention. The voiceover, deep and resonant, spoke of order, of security, of a galaxy united under the enlightened guidance of the New Order. To serve the Empire is to serve the future, the voice boomed, as the trooper raised his blaster rifle in a crisp salute. Varric, 16 and wiry, mimicked the gesture with a stick he'd carved to resemble an E11. He stood before the cracked mirror on his wall, his reflection a pale, serious boy with hair the color of wet sand. He practiced the stance, the turn of the head, the unwavering focus. On his bed lay his most prized possession, a real stormtrooper helmet, its right lens cracked and the vocoder scarred by blaster scoring. He'd found it in the wreckage of a downed Lambda-class shuttle after a skirmish between rebels and Imperials on the outskirts of his homeworld, Tamsin Prime. To the rebels, it was junk. To Varric, it was a relic. "Varric, supper," his mother's voice called from the main room of their prefabricated habitat unit, slicing through the Imperial fanfare. He sighed, pausing the hologram, "Coming, Mom." He carefully placed the helmet back on its stand, a crate of spare power converters. His room was a shrine to an idealized empire. Faded posters of star destroyers, schematics of AT-ATs he'd meticulously copied from the public archives, and a small, Imperial flag he'd sewn himself from white and black cloth. It was a fantasy, a clean, orderly dream he'd built to escape the gritty, fuel-stained reality of Tamsin Prime, a world whose only notable feature was a mid-sized spaceport that serviced freighters and the occasional Imperial patrol. He emerged into the main living area. His mother, Liana, was stirring a pot of protein-rich stew, the air thick with the smell of root vegetables and reused cooking oil. She was a woman in her late 30s, but worry and hard work had etched lines around her eyes that made her look older. Her hands, though, were still steady and capable. "Still playing soldier?" she asked, her tone light but with an undercurrent of something else, concern, perhaps, or a sadness he could never quite decipher. "It's not playing, Mom, it's preparation. Commander Veers started as a cadet, you know, so did Piet. There's a path." He sat at the small table, its surface scarred by years of use. Liana ladled stew into 2 bowls. Men like Veers and Piet were born on worlds with a lot more opportunity than this rock. The Empire, it's not what the Hollows say, Varric, it's a machine. It grinds people up. "It keeps the peace," he countered, a well-rehearsed argument. "It ended the Clone Wars. Without the Empire, we'd have warlords and pirates everywhere, like the ones who killed Dad." His mother flinched almost imperceptibly. Varric's father, a freelance cargo pilot, had been killed when his ship was destroyed in an ambiguous incident in the Outer Rim. The Imperial report had listed it as a pirate attack. It was the foundational tragedy of their lives, the event that had cemented in Varric's young mind the need for a strong, galactic authority to punish such lawlessness. "The galaxy is more complicated than that, my love," Liana said softly, placing a bowl in front of him. She never engaged in the argument fully, always retreating into vague generalities that frustrated him. They ate in a silence, broken only by the hum of the habitat's power generator. Outside, the twin moons of Tamsin Prime were rising, casting a sickly green light through the transparisteel viewport. It was then that they heard it, the distinctive whine of a repulsor lift engine growing louder. Not a speeder truck, something smaller, more official. Varric jumped up, rushing to the viewport. "It's an Imperial patrol speeder bike and a stormtrooper." His heart hammered with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. An actual stormtrooper here, he'd only ever seen them from a distance, marching in perfect lockstep through the spaceport. This was different, this was personal. Liana's face drained of color. She stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. "Varric, go to your room." "What? Why? This is incredible. Maybe they've heard about my scores on the aptitude sims at the port. Maybe it's a recruitment scout." "Varric, now." Her voice was sharp, a tone she rarely used. The firmness in her voice stopped him cold. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes. Before he could process it, a heavy fist pounded on the reinforced Durasteel door. Liana moved to the door, her hand hovering over the release. She took a deep breath, then pressed the button. The door slid open with a hiss. Framed in the doorway was the stormtrooper. He was taller and broader than Varric had imagined, his white armor seeming to absorb the room's dim light. The black eye lenses of his helmet were impersonal, insectoid. This wasn't the heroic figure from the hologram, this was a predator. Liana Thorne, the trooper's filtered voice grated. It was flat, devoid of emotion. "Yes, how can I help you, officer?" Liana's voice was steady, but Varric could see the fine tremor in her hands. "By order of the Imperial Security Bureau, you are under arrest for seditious conspiracy and suspected affiliation with the Rebel Alliance." The trooper raised his blaster rifle, not aiming directly at her, but holding it in a ready position. "You will come with me for interrogation." The world seemed to slow down. Seditious conspiracy, Rebel Alliance, it was absurd. His mother was a mechanic, a widow. She fixed freighters and argued about the price of Tabana gas. She wasn't a rebel. "There's been a mistake," Liana said, her voice tight. "There is no mistake. Intelligence links you to the smuggling of restricted components through the spaceport. Come quietly." Varric found his voice, stepping forward. "Wait, you have the wrong person. My mother isn't a criminal. She's a patriot. We support the Empire." The trooper's helmet tilted slightly towards him. "Step aside, citizen. Do not interfere with Imperial justice." "Varric, be quiet," Liana pleaded, her eyes begging him to stop. But the dream was curdling into a nightmare. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. The Empire was justice. It was order. It didn't threaten hardworking mothers in their own homes. The cognitive dissonance was a physical pain in his chest. The trooper took a step forward, his free hand reaching for a pair of stun cuffs on his belt. "Final warning, comply or be subdued." As the trooper moved towards his mother, Varric's eyes darted to his bedroom door, to the helmet on the crate, to the fantasy, and then they fell on the heavy hydrospanner lying on a tool bench by the door, where his mother had been fixing a malfunctioning heater. It happened in a flash, a surge of blind, protective rage. The trooper's back was to him. Varric lunged, his fingers closing around the cold, greasy metal of the spanner. He swung it with all the strength his adolescent body could muster. The crack against the back of the trooper's helmet was sickeningly loud. It wasn't the clean thwack of the hollows, it was a dull, brutal sound of metal on plastoid. The trooper grunted, stumbling forward. His helmet had protected him from a killing blow, but the impact was disorienting. He dropped the stun cuffs and turned, his movements sluggish with shock. "You little," the filtered voice snarled. He raised his blaster, but Liana was faster. She threw the entire pot of hot stew into his faceplate. The trooper roared, blinded and scalded, clawing at his helmet. The blaster fired, a scarlet bolt that seared into the ceiling, filling the room with the smell of ozone and melted wiring. It was chaos. Varric stood frozen, the hydrospanner dangling from his hand, watching the embodiment of his dream flail and curse. The trooper finally wrenched his helmet off, revealing a face contorted with pain and fury, one side already blistering from the hot stew. He was just a man with close-cropped hair and hate-filled eyes. He raised his blaster again, aiming directly at Varric. "No!" Liana screamed. She shoved Varric out of the way. The blaster bolt meant for him caught her in the shoulder. She cried out, collapsing to the floor, her tunic smoking. A red mist descended over Varric's vision. The man had shot his mother. The Empire, the stormtrooper, the dream, it had all shot his mother. With a wordless scream, he charged. The trooper, still partially blinded, was too slow. Varric brought the hydrospanner down again and again and again. Not on the armor this time, but on the man's head, his neck. The sounds were wet and terrible. The struggles ceased. Silence. The only sounds were Varric's ragged breaths and a low moan from his mother. He dropped the bloody spanner, its clatter on the floor deafening. He stared at the body. The white armor was spattered with red. The man's sightless eyes stared at the ceiling. The dream was dead, lying in a pool of stew and blood on their floor. "Mom," he rushed to her side, his hands shaking as he tried to assess the wound. It was a clean blaster burn through the muscle of her upper arm, painful, debilitating, but not immediately fatal. "Varric, what have you done?" she whispered, her face ashen. "He was going to kill me. He shot you." The words sounded hollow, inadequate. "They'll come for you. They'll know. They'll execute you." Her eyes were wide with a terror greater than any she'd shown for herself. She gripped his arm with her good hand, her nails digging into his skin. "Listen to me. You have to go, now." "I'm not leaving you." "You have to," she hissed, her voice fierce with pain and urgency. "This is my fault. My past, it's finally caught up. I should have told you." "Told me what?" "Your father, he wasn't killed by pirates. He was running a shipment for the rebellion. The Imperials caught him." The confession was a gut punch. I've been helping too. Small things, information, parts. The friend I told you about, the one who gave you that old comlink, Borvo, he's not just a port manager, he's a smuggler for the rebellion." The foundations of Varric's life crumbled to dust. His father, a rebel, his mother, a traitor, the Empire, the murderers of his father, and the would-be executioners of his mother. He had just killed a man to protect a lie he'd built his life upon. "I'll take the blame," Liana said, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "I'll say I killed him. They'll arrest me. It's what they came for anyway. But you have to run. Go to Borvo at the spaceport. Tell him what happened. Tell him I sent you. He'll know what to do. He'll get you off-world." "I can't let you do that." "You have to." She pulled him close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "This is my penance for letting you believe in the monster that killed your father. Now go, before the patrol reports in and more come." Sirens began to wail in the distance. The blaster shot had been noticed. Tears streamed down Varric's face, cutting through the spatter of blood on his cheeks. He looked from his mother's determined, pained face to the dead stormtrooper, then back again. There was no choice. The boy who dreamed of white armor was dead on the floor. Someone else was being born in this moment of blood and betrayal. He kissed his mother's forehead. "I love you. I love you, Varric. Now run, and don't look back." He grabbed a small go bag his mother always kept ready for emergencies, a habit he now understood, and with one last, agonizing look, he slipped out the back entrance into the alleyways of Tamsin Prime, just as the glare of searchlights from an approaching Imperial patrol speeder lit up the front of his home. The spaceport was a chaotic symphony of roaring engines, shouting dockworkers, and the clanging of machinery. Varric moved through the familiar maze of landing bays and cargo stacks like a ghost, his senses heightened, expecting an Imperial grip on his shoulder at any moment. He found Borvo's office tucked away in a grimy corner of Bay 47, behind a stack of crates marked agricultural droids, handle with care. Borvo was a Gran, his three stalked eyes swiveling independently as Varric burst in. He was on the comlink, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Yeah, the Tabana shipment is delayed. Atmospheric disturbances. Tell our friends to be patient." He saw Varric, took in his disheveled, blood-speckled appearance, and his middle eye narrowed. "I'll call you back." He cut the connection. "Kid, what in the blazes happened?" "My mom, she sent me. A stormtrooper, he's dead. She told me to come to you. She told me everything." Borvo's face, already leathery, seemed to harden further. He sighed, a sound of deep weariness. "Liana, stubborn fool, I told her it was getting too hot." He stood up, locking his office door. "The trooper, you." Varric could only nod, the image of the crushed skull flashing behind his eyes. "Carabast," Borvo muttered. "All right, kid, you're a fugitive now. The imps will be crawling all over this port in an hour. You're coming with me." "My mom is where she chose to be," Borvo said, not unkindly. "She bought you a chance. Don't waste it. We have a freighter, the Stardust Racer, piece of junk, but she's fast. Crews a bit eclectic, but they're reliable. You'll be our new cargo hand. Keep your head down, do what you're told, and you might just live through the week." Within the hour, Varric was standing in the dimly lit cargo hold of the Stardust Racer. which smelled of ozone, old lubricant, and something vaguely organic. The crew assembled before him. There was Rorin, the pilot and captain, a grizzled Corellian with a cynical twist to his mouth and a blaster pistol that never left his hip. He looked Varric up and down like he was assessing a faulty hyperdrive motivator. "So you're Lyanna's boy," Rorin said, his voice a dry rasp. "Heard you cracked a buckethead's skull. Not a bad start. Just don't bring that trouble onto my ship." Then there was Lyra, the co-pilot and mechanic, a Mirialan with green skin and intricate tattoos covering her face and hands. She moved with a quiet, efficient grace. She didn't speak, just offered Varric a small, appraising nod. Jax was the muscle, a hulking Zabrak whose horned head was a canvas of scars. He stood with his massive arms crossed, his expression unreadable. And finally, there was Tico, the Sulastan navigator, whose large, black eyes and flapping ears betrayed a constant state of nervous excitement. "This is it?" Varric asked, his voice small. "This is it," Rorin confirmed. "We're smugglers, kid, not a bloody parade. Strap in. We're blowing this dust bowl before the imp blockade locks it down." The launch was a nerve-shredding affair. From the viewport of the common area, Varric watched Tamsin Prime shrink away, a brown and green marble. He saw the pinpricks of light that were star destroyers moving into position. His home was gone. His mother was in the hands of the ISB, and he was on a rebel smuggler's ship, hurtling into the unknown. Their first few runs were simple, almost mundane. They hauled medical supplies to a beleaguered colony on a moon in the Outer Rim, evading a pirate patrol by jumping to lightspeed a second before their tractor beam could lock on. They transported a load of droid parts to a mining consortium on a world that had no mines, a clear front for the rebellion. Varric's job was to load and unload cargo, run diagnostics on the hold's environmental controls, and generally make himself useful. He was quiet, withdrawn, the ghost of the dead stormtrooper, a constant companion. Lyra was the first to break through his shell. She found him one day, staring at a wiring schematic he was supposed to be repairing. "You're holding the soldering iron wrong," she said softly. She showed him the proper grip, her hands steady and sure. "The Empire tells you there's one way to do things, their way. Out here, you learn what works." Slowly, he began to learn, not just about ships, but about the galaxy. He listened to Rorin and Jax argue politics in the common area. "The Empire brings order," Jax would scoff, his voice a low rumble. "Tell that to my clan on Iridonia. They ordered us into labor camps. Order is just another word for control." Tico, with his natural talent for astrogation, would chatter about the hidden hyperspace lanes he'd discovered, routes that weren't on any Imperial chart. "The Empire sees straight lines," he'd squeak, "but the galaxy is all curves and corners." Varric started to see the cracks in the Imperial facade he'd worshipped. He saw the poverty on worlds choked by Imperial tariffs. He heard stories of whole cultures being erased in the name of uniformity. The clean, white narrative of his youth was being replaced by a messy, complicated, and often brutal truth. The Stardust Racer was successful. They were reliable, discreet, and thanks to Tico's navigation and Rorin's piloting, they could deliver goods where other smugglers failed. Their reputation grew within the shadowy network of the Rebel Alliance. Their point of contact was a woman named Commander Yvonne, a crisp, professional Monday calamari who communicated via encrypted hologram. Her initial gratitude turned to pointed expectation. "The Stardust Racer has proven its worth," her blue image stated during one briefing. "It is time for a greater test. We have a critical shortage of coaxium for our starfighter core. An Imperial fuel transport, the Ignis, is carrying a shipment of refined coaxium from Kessel to a fleet depot in the core. We need you to intercept it." Rorin whistled. "That's not a test, Commander. That's a suicide mission. The Ignis will have an escort, probably a Arquitens-class light cruiser." "The rebellion is built on suicide missions, Captain," Yvonne replied coolly. "The payoff is worth the risk. The coordinates and escort details will be transmitted. May the Force be with you." The plan was audacious. They couldn't fight the Ignis or its escort. Instead, they used a modified Givin resonance frequency algorithm, courtesy of a disgruntled Imperial scientist now working for the rebellion to temporarily disrupt the transport's navigational systems. As the Ignis and its escort stumbled blindly for 30 seconds, the Stardust Racer, running with all transponders off and emissions scrubbed, latched onto its hull with magnetic clamps. Jax and Varric, in sealed environment suits, used plasma cutters to breach a secondary cargo hatch while Lyra hacked the internal door controls from the ship. They moved in the eerie silence of zero-G, the vastness of space, just a few centimeters of durasteel away. Varric's heart felt like it was going to beat out of his chest. This was the empire he had once dreamed of serving, and he was bleeding it dry. They secured 3 barrels of high-purity coaxium, each one worth a fortune and capable of fueling a dozen X-Wings. As they detached and fled into hyperspace, Varric looked back at the confused Imperial vessels. He felt no hatred, only a cold, clear purpose. This was for his father, for his mother, for the boy he used to be. The success of the Ignis heist put them on the map. Commander Ivan's hologram now held a new level of respect. "Your actions have saved countless lives," she said. "You have the gratitude of the Alliance, and we have another task, even more dangerous." The next mission was a frigate, the Luminous Shadow, rumored to be carrying a hold full of kyber crystals, the powerful energy-focusing gems the Empire was known to hoard. The intelligence came from a new source, an Imperial officer who had turned informant. They met the officer, a Lieutenant Cade, in the gloomy underbelly of a space station on the edge of the mid-rim. He was a nervous man, his Imperial uniform looking too large on his gaunt frame. "The shipments, they don't make sense," he whispered, his eyes darting around. "The kyber is being sent to a remote sector, a place called the Hadron Sector. There's nothing there, just a red dwarf star and a single uninhabited gas giant. But the logistics, the resources being poured in, it's a second Death Star. It has to be." The name hung in the air like a poison. The Death Star, the weapon that had destroyed Alderaan. The weapon a handful of rebel pilots had miraculously destroyed. Roran's face was grim. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing it myself," Cade said. "The patterns are identical to the first one. Concentrated kyber shipments, hypermatter fuel, durasteel from worlds known for orbital construction. They're building another." The mission to the Luminous Shadow was a bloodbath. They used a similar infiltration method, but the frigate's internal security was far tighter. They were discovered. Blaster fire echoed through the narrow corridors. Jax took a bolt to the leg, his roars of pain mixing with the sizzle of his own return fire. Lyra used her technical skills to reroute power, creating explosive distractions. Varric, armed with a stolen E-11 for the first time, found himself firing at stormtroopers, the kick of the rifle a jarring contrast to the carved stick of his childhood. He didn't aim to kill, shooting at limbs and weapons, but he saw Jax cut down 2 without hesitation. It was brutal, close-quarters combat. They escaped by the skin of their teeth, with a small cache of kyber crystals and 2 fewer crew members, a Rhodian gunner and the Bothan communications officer who had joined them just a month prior. Back on the Stardust Racer, the mood was somber. They had the crystals, they had the confirmation, but the cost was etched on their faces. Jax grunted as Lyra patched up his leg. They fought well, for imps. Roran stared at the kyber crystal sitting on the common room table, its inner light pulsing softly. A second Death Star, they never learn. Commander Ivan's next briefing was grave. "The intelligence you have brought us is catastrophic. We believe the Emperor himself is overseeing this project. Lieutenant Cade's information about the Hadron Sector is our only lead. We need to know what is there. We need proof. Visual confirmation, shield frequencies, power readings, everything." "You want us to go to an Imperial superweapon construction site?" Roran asked, his voice flat. "We want you to find it first," Ivan corrected. "The Hadron Sector is vast. Our analysis of the shipment routes points to a specific gravitational signature, a forest moon orbiting the gas giant indoor. We believe the construction is happening in orbit around the moon, and that the moon itself houses the planetary shield generator protecting the project. Your mission is to infiltrate the forest moon of Endor, locate the shield generator base, and gather all the data you can. Varric felt a chill. A forest moon. It sounded peaceful, but the name Endor meant nothing to any of them. It was just a dot on a star chart, a place to die. It's a recon mission, Ivan insisted. In and out. Avoid contact. The indigenous species are supposed to be primitive, non-hostile. You'll be in and out before the Empire knows you were ever there. As the Stardust racer shot through the swirling blue tunnel of hyperspace, Varric had a bad feeling about this. The words primitive and non-hostile echoed in his mind, sounding less like a reassurance and more like a famous last word. The Stardust racer dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Hadron sector. Before them hung the gas giant Endor, a vast, striped orb of greens and browns. And there, nestled in its orbit, was the forest moon, a deceptively tranquil sphere of deep green. And then they saw it. Even from this distance, it was immense. A skeletal framework of durasteel glowing with the lights of 1,000 construction projects floating in the void. It was only half finished, a jagged crescent of terror, but its scale was undeniable. The second Death Star. Karabast, Roran breathed, the cursor prayer of horror. They were all gathered on the bridge, staring in stunned silence. The reality of it was far worse than any rumor. Scanning, Tico chirped, his fingers flying over the console. I'm reading a massive energy shield emanating from the moon. It's enveloping the entire construction site. No getting through that. Then we go down, Roran said, his voice tight. Strap in, we're making a silent approach. Let's hope those trees are as thick as they look. They flew a desperate, evasive course, using the gas giant's radiation and gravitational pull to mask their entry. The descent into the atmosphere was rough, the ship shuddering as it plunged into the endless canopy of giant trees. Roran set them down in a small clearing near a gurgling stream, the ship groaning in protest as it settled into the soft loam. The air was thick, humid, and alive with sound. The chirps, clicks, and hoots of unseen creatures created a constant, layered symphony. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy in shifting pillars of gold. It was beautiful and deeply unnerving. All right, Roran said, checking his blaster rifle. Standard recon protocol. We move in pairs. Lyra, you're with me. We'll scout the perimeter, look for patrols and sensor arrays. Jax, you and Varric head towards that ridge line. See if you can get a visual on this shield generator. Tico, you stay with the ship. Keep the engines warm and the comms open. We report back in 4 hours. No engagement. We see imps, we hide. We see locals, we smile and walk away. Understood. Varric nodded, his mouth dry. He was equipped with a blaster pistol and a datapad for recording scans. Jax hefted his heavy repeater blaster, his expression grim. The forest was a labyrinth. The ground was a soft carpet of centuries of fallen leaves, muffling their footsteps. The trees were colossal, their trunks wider than the Stardust racer. They had been walking for an hour when they first felt it, the sensation of being watched. You hear that? Jax grunted, stopping. Varric listened. The forest sounds had changed. The cheerful chirping had stopped. Now there was only a tense, waiting silence, broken by the occasional rustle in the high branches. Probably just an animal, Varric said, trying to sound confident. Then a small, round stone whizzed out of the foliage and bounced harmlessly off Jax's armored shoulder. Jax spun around, his repeater coming up. What was that? Another stone, then a third, then a net woven from thick vines dropped from above, entangling Varric. He cried out, struggling against the surprisingly strong fibers. More nets fell. Small, furry creatures dropped from the trees, chattering excitedly. They were about 1 meter tall, with large dark eyes and brown fur. Yuhux. Get off, Jax roared, swatting at them. But for every one he batted away, 3 more took its place. They were incredibly agile, swarming over the massive Zabrak, tying his arms with vines, pulling at his weapon. Varric, still trapped in the net, watched in disbelief. This was the primitive, non-hostile species. They moved with a coordinated, practiced efficiency. He saw Jax, for all his strength, being overwhelmed. A dozen Ewoks pulled on vines wrapped around his legs, and with a final, furious bellow, the Zabrak crashed to the forest floor. They swarmed him, tying him up with astonishing speed. Varric felt his own net being hoisted into the air. He was dangling, a captured prize, being carried through the trees by a horde of chattering, victorious Ewoks. He lost sight of Jax, the Zabrak's struggles growing fainter. He caught glimpses of the Ewoks' village, huts built high in the trees, rope bridges, cooking fires. It was a sophisticated, complex society, and they were clearly not welcome. He was dumped unceremoniously into a cage made of woven branches and bone. A short while later, a struggling Lyra was thrown in beside him. Her face was scratched, and one of her head tails was bruised. "Roran," Varric asked, his voice trembling. "They got him too," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "They used some kind of blow darts. He went down before he could even fire a shot. They're not primitive, Varric. They're tactical. They use the forest." Hours passed. The Ewoks brought them food, a pasty substance made from roots and what looked like grubs. They refused it. The sun began to set, casting long, sinister shadows through the trees. The Ewoks started a large bonfire in the center of the village, their chanting taking on a more rhythmic, ominous tone. "I don't like the sound of that," Lyra whispered. Their fears were confirmed when they saw Tico, his large eyes wide with terror, being carried towards a large spit being assembled over the fire. "No," Varric shouted, shaking the bars of his cage. "Let him go." It was Jax who saved them, or rather, his raw strength. With a roar that silenced the entire village, the Zabrak burst from the hut where he was being held, the ropes that bound him snapping like thread. He was a force of nature, swatting Ewoks aside, not to kill them, but to clear a path. He smashed the lock on Varric and Lyra's cage with one punch. "Run," he bellowed, "to the ship. I'll hold them off." It was chaos. Ewoks were everywhere, throwing spears, firing darts. Jax stood his ground, a mountain of fury, his repeater blaster firing stun bursts into the crowd, creating a perimeter. Lyra grabbed Varric's arm. "Come on, we have to find Roran." They found the captain in another cage, just beginning to wake from the drugged darts. They freed him, and the three of them, with Jax covering their retreat, fought their way out of the village, plunging back into the dark forest. The Ewoks, enraged at the loss of their feast, gave chase, their high-pitched war cries echoing through the trees. They ran, branches whipping at their faces, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They had no idea where they were going, only that they had to get away. Behind them, the sounds of Jax's blaster fire grew more sporadic, then stopped altogether. They didn't stop to see what had happened. They couldn't. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled into another clearing. Panting, they leaned against the giant trees, trying to get their bearings. "Jax," Varric gasped. "He knew the cost," Roran said, his face grim. "He bought us time. Tico is gone, Jax is gone, we're down to 3. He looked at the datapad on Varric's belt. "The mission is all that's left. We find that generator." Using the moon's position and the faint, thrumming energy signature they could now feel through the soles of their boots, they navigated towards the Imperial base. They moved with extreme caution, the encounter with the Ewoks having shattered any illusion of safety. They crested a ridge and saw it, a massive gray complex of Imperial architecture carved into a mountainside. A landing platform held a pair of ATST walkers standing guard like metal chickens. A tall, dish-shaped tower rose from the center of the base, the shield projector. Stormtroopers patrolled the perimeter in neat, white lines. "There it is," Lyra whispered, "the key to the whole thing." "Getting in there is impossible," Varric said, his heart sinking. The base was a fortress. "Nothing's impossible," Roran murmured, his eyes scanning the base. "Just very, very difficult. We need a distraction." As if on cue, an alarm blared from the base. The patrols suddenly became more animated, running towards the tree line on the far side of the clearing. "What's happening?" Varric asked. Roran grinned, a wolfish, tired smile. "I'd wager our furry friends have decided to take the fight to the imps. Looks like we have our distraction." The Uok assault was a chaotic, frenzied affair. Spears and arrows rained down on the stormtroopers from the trees. Logs swung on vines, knocking troopers off their feet. It was a primal, furious attack, and for a moment, it worked. The Imperial forces were thrown into disarray, focused entirely on the swarm of small, angry creatures. "This is our chance," Roran said. "Lyra, you're the best slicer. You get inside, find the main control room, download everything you can about that shield, the power grid, everything. Varric, you're with me. We'll create a secondary diversion, draw some of them away from her entry point." It was a desperate, split-second plan. Lyra nodded, her green face set with determination. She slipped away, using the cover of the giant trees and the Uok chaos to approach the base's service entrance. Roran and Varric moved to the opposite side. Roran took a thermal detonator from his belt. "When I throw this, they're going to come running. We hit them hard and fast, then we fade back into the trees. We'll meet Lyra at the secondary extraction point." "Understood." Varric gripped his blaster, his knuckles white. "Understood." Roran primed the detonator and threw it. It sailed in a high arc, landing near a parked speeder bike. The explosion was deafening, engulfing the speeder and two nearby stormtroopers in a ball of fire. Alarms redoubled. A squad of stormtroopers broke off from the Uok engagement and charged towards their position. "Now," Roran yelled, opening fire. Varric fired with him. This time, he didn't aim for limbs, he aimed for center mass. White armor cracked and smoked. Troopers fell. They were fighting for their lives, for the mission, for Jax and Tico, for his mother, for a galaxy that didn't deserve another Death Star. They fell back, trading blaster fire with the pursuing squad. They were drawing them away, just as planned. For a few glorious minutes, it worked. They were holding their own, using the giant trees as cover. Then a new sound joined the fray. The mechanized, rhythmic footfalls of an AT-ST. "Carabast," Roran cursed, looking up as the walker's head swiveled towards them. "Scatter." The forest exploded around them as the walker's chin-mounted blaster cannons opened fire. Trees that had stood for 1,000 years were vaporized in an instant. Varric was thrown from his feet by the concussive force, his blaster flying from his hand. He looked up, dazed, to see Roran standing his ground, firing his rifle at the walker's viewport. It was a futile, heroic gesture. The walker's heavy blaster fired again. The bolt caught Roran square in the chest. There was no cry, no dramatic fall. One moment he was there, the grizzled Corellian who had given him a chance. The next, he was a cloud of vapor and scorched earth. Varric screamed. Before he could even process the loss, a boot slammed into his side, rolling him over. The black eye lenses of a stormtrooper's helmet stared down at him. Another trooper grabbed him, hauling him to his feet. He was surrounded. The diversion was over. He saw Lyra then. She had emerged from a service hatch on the far side of the base, a data card clutched in her hand. She saw him captured. She saw Roran's remains. Their eyes met across the clearing. There was a moment of perfect, terrible understanding. She had the data. He was a prisoner. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't run." Lyra hesitated for a heartbreak second, then turned and vanished back into the forest. Varric felt a strange sense of peace. She had it. The mission was a success. Now all that was left was the end. He and the other captured crew members, a human gunner he barely knew and a Twi'lek scout, were dragged to their knees near the base's main entrance. The AT-ST stood over them, a silent, menacing executioner. The stormtrooper commander, his armor bearing the pauldron of a lieutenant, stood before them. "Rebel scum," the filtered voice spat. "You have trespassed on a restricted Imperial installation. The penalty is death." There were no last words, no grand speeches. The lieutenant nodded. The stormtroopers raised their blaster rifles. Varric didn't look at the barrels. He looked up, through the gap in the trees, to the sky. Somewhere up there, beyond the green-tinted shield, the half-built Death Star hung in the void. He thought of his mother, in some Imperial cell, hoping he had escaped. He thought of his father, dying for a cause he never knew. He thought of the boy in the room with the posters who believed in white armor and order. That boy was long gone. The last thing Varric Thorn saw was the endless, serene blue of the Endor sky. Then, the world turned red, then black. Lyra ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. She didn't stop until she was deep in the heart of the dark forest, where the Ewoks dared not go. She collapsed at the base of a giant tree, sobbing, the data card clutched so tightly in her fist it almost broke. She had seen it all, the explosion that killed Roran, the capture of Varric and the others, the brief, merciless flashes of blaster fire that signaled the end. They were all gone. The Stardust Racer was a tomb. But she had the data. Slicing into the Imperial network, she had downloaded everything, the shield generator's harmonic frequency, its power cycling, its structural weaknesses. She had the complete technical schematics of the base. She had the flight paths of the Imperial patrols. She had everything the rebellion needed. Her grief was a physical weight, but beneath it was a core of durasteel resolve. They had not died for nothing. It took her 3 days to navigate back to the ship, avoiding both Ewok hunting parties and Imperial patrols. The Stardust Racer was as they had left it. She boarded the silent vessel, the emptiness a palpable presence. She went straight to the cockpit, ignoring the ghost of Roran in the pilot's chair, the echo of Tico's chattering, the memory of Jax's grumbling, and the quiet, lost boy who had become a man in the fires of their shared cause. She powered up the engines, the sound a welcome roar in the silence. She input the coordinates Tico had calculated for their emergency escape, a remote, icy world on the other side of the galaxy. Hoth. The jump to lightspeed was a release. Weeks later, a ragged, lone Mirialan woman walked into the main hangar of the newly established Echo base on Hoth. She was escorted directly to Commander Ivan. Lyra placed the data card on the Monday Calamari's desk. "The crew of the Stardust Racer," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse, "their final report." Ivan inserted the card. Schematics, frequencies, and power readings flooded her screen. Her large, fish-like eyes widened. This is everything, more than we dared hope for." She looked up at Lyra, seeing the deep, unhealed wounds in her eyes. "The others." "Gone," Lyra said simply. "They bought this with their lives, all of them." Ivan stood, her demeanor one of profound respect. "Their names will be remembered. Their sacrifice will be the foundation of our victory." As Lyra was led away to be debriefed and fed, Ivan looked back at the data. It was the key. This information would allow a strike team to land on the moon, deactivate the shield, and open a path for the rebel fleet to attack the Death Star itself. The war would go on. The Battle of Endor was yet to be fought, but in a quiet hangar on a frozen world, the first crucial victory had already been won by a boy who had shattered his dream, a smuggler with a heart, a quiet mechanic, a giant, and a nervous navigator. Their story would never be in the history books, their names lost to all but a few, but the galaxy, free and alive, would be their legacy. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for the support.